So welcome and thank you for coming. My name is Tom Zohar. I'm a second year student of economics here at the IDC. And I want to tell you why did I arrange this evening. So about a year ago, I came familiar with Dan Ariely's papers and articles about human irrationality. As we all know, Dan is a very convincing person, so obviously I was quickly convinced. And that made me wonder, why am I studying economics? Basically, if we're irrational, so all of the economic theory doesn't hold on in real life. Then I met Shachar. Shachar Kariv is a professor from UC Berkeley, and he came for a sabbatical here in his homeland at the IDC. Israel is his homeland, but the IDC. And he presented 2 semesters ago. He presented his academic work and his papers. And again, I was quickly convinced. So I started wondering if the problem is with me, and maybe I'm too easy to convince. And then came the idea to do this event. So I asked Shachar, and then I sent an email to Dan, and I was sure that I'm going to get a negative response, or no response. And what I didn't know is also Dan found Shachar really interesting, and it didn't took more than 2 minutes till I got a response, and I'm quoting, "Sure thing, Shachar is a very interesting, smart, yet misguided person." So a little bit of history of the two. Many years ago, Shachar finished his PhD at NYU and started looking for a job. And he also sent an application for MIT, and Dan saw his application and wanted to pull him over to MIT. That didn't work out for several reasons. And Shachar went to Berkeley, but they stayed in touch.
You remember the reason?
The reason what? They wanted you?
No, you didn't have a position for me.
Yeah, we were trying to make one.
But they stayed in touch.
You remember the reason?
The reason what? They wanted you?
No, you didn't have a position for me.
Yeah, we were trying to make one. You didn't wait.
You lost money in the truck market. Remember?
Yeah.
The position was vanished because MIT lost money in the trucking business.
So after she lost money, they stayed in touch for 2 more years, and then they decided to do a sabbatical year in Princeton together. Now, Shachar was a young assistant professor back then, and he couldn't, no one gave him a sabbatical year yet, so in Princeton only give half a paycheck. So what Dan didn't tell me, but Shachar did, is that Dan withdraws his own paycheck to Shachar's favor just for the possibility to be with him an year together at Princeton.
He's that good.
I'm that rational. I'm exploiting irrational people.
So yeah, maybe that's irrational. And talking about irrational, Professor Melnick saw how all of you came today, and he said, that's a proof of irrationality when you're coming here and you can go to the beach. So before we start with the business, I want to show you a short video.
Hello, I'm behavioral economics.
And I'm standard economics. Isn't this a wonderful world that we live in? People always making rational decisions all the time, never letting their emotions cloud their judgment, and always thinking about the future.
I don't see where you get this. So think, for example, have you ever been to a restaurant where you were planning to be on a diet and not having dessert, and all of a sudden the waiter comes with some fancy dessert, maybe chocolate souffle, and offer it to you, and you fall to temptation?
Oh, no. I always plan out my meals in advance in my daily food log.
What about sex? Imagine that you're aroused, you're with somebody, and you don't have a condom. What would you do under those circumstances?
That would never happen. I use my much smaller daily sex planner.
A little bit of promotion for the book. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the evening. Basically, it's a debate. So I'm going to present a question, and then Shachar will have the opportunity to answer around 2-3 minutes. Then we'll have the opportunity to answer, and then they'll each have another 2-3 minutes to give a counter-argument. I'll present a few questions like that, and then in the end we'll have time for questions from the audience. Okay, so let's get to work. First question. In order to have a concrete debate, we must first define rationality. So, as you can understand, define rationality and define the criteria that you base your definition on. By criteria, I mean, how do you measure your rationality?
You flip a coin, who starts?
Go for it.
Really? Okay. Okay, so, you know, I admit I'm a narrow-minded economist, and for me, human beings are simple machines, and these machines have to solve 4 types of trade-offs. The first trade-off is risk-return. The second trade-off is today, tomorrow. The third trade-off is work or leisure. And the last trade-off is self versus others. And if you think about your most important decisions in life, as well as your simplest decisions, they are all combinations of solving these 4 trade-offs. For example, how much should I save to retirement? It has to do with my risk preferences, how risk-averse I am that I'll be sick when I am retired. It is, of course, has to do with today versus tomorrow. Do I buy now a bigger TV or I save more for retirement? It has to do with work or leisure, because if I want to save to retirement, I cannot sit in front of the TV and watch Ach HaGadol. I actually need to go to work. And of course, it depends on self versus others, because I can say to myself, you know, I want to leave something also for my children, for example. So while we go in life and we solve these 4 trade-offs, I would call a rational decision maker someone who is making high quality, someone who is making high quality decisions. Now, what is to make high quality decision? This is some notion of maximizing his well-being, broadly defined. So the first thing that I want to put is a necessary but not sufficient condition to somebody to be rational, or somebody who is maximizing his well-being. And before we started the debate, Tom actually told me, Shachar, you need to speak to people such that they understand. So I'm not going to follow his advice, of course. So for me, a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition for someone to be rational, is if he has a complete and transitive preference ordering over the alternatives available to him. What does it mean, complete? Complete means that he understands what he's choosing. You tell him, here is a banana, here is an apple. Having complete preferences over apples and bananas simply means that I understand what is a banana, and I understand what is an apple. The second condition is transitivity. And transitivity basically says there are no cycles in my decision making. I will not tell you I prefer option A to option B, and option B to option C, but I prefer C to A. Then, of course, there is a cycle in my decision. I can always offer you trade such that you will be worse off. Now, why is it important? Apparently, there is a theorem, first showed by our founding father, Paul Samuelson from MIT, and then proved by Afriat and Uzawa and Varian and many, many others, that if someone has a complete and transitive preference ordering in the way that I define, their choices maximizing an objective function. You can basically characterize what they do in maximizing some function. Economists call it a utility function. Now, I know that probably for us, it's very convenient because we think that then you can basically describe human beings in terms of mathematics, and this is the most parsimonious way that I know to represent something. And for me, a theory has to be first parsimonious, and secondly, we'll get to it later, I'm sure, can be falsified with an existing set of data. But more important...
I think that was a hint.
Really? Never mind. You give me some of your time.
I give the floor to the gentleman.
Thank you. So I will call somebody that actually maximizing an objective function. It doesn't matter that I call it a utility function. I'm going to call him someone who is rational or a homo economicus. And what I will plan, what I think, and I think a lot of research shows that actually we are very close to being homo economicus.
Okay. So it was actually very good that Shachar went first because he defined, I think, one of the important versions of what rationality means. So for me, I have two versions of rationality when I think about people violating rationality. The first one is to show that people don't have complete and transitive preferences. And the reason I care about this is not because it's a particularly important definition in my world, but it's a definition that the economists have sold to the world. Right? So, by the way, just to be clear, we could go and attack lots of professions. We could go and attack historians or philosophers. Why do we spend our time attacking economists? The reason is that I think economists have oversold the conclusions from the profession. If all economists would have said, we have a theory that explains 25% of human behavior and we're very happy and very proud about it, that would have been a wonderful thing to do. But economists go a step further and they make it into a prescriptive theory that you have to do something in the world about it, right? They say, here is how you build a tax system. Here's how you build a financial market. And when you take economic theory seriously and you use it to build something in the world, now it has to be 100% accurate. 25% is not enough. And that's the real issue with economics. If economists would have stayed in academia, I don't think anybody would have wasted their time arguing with them. The fact that economists have been incredibly successful in exporting the theory is the reason for the attack. So the first definition of economics, of rationality I care about is the economist definition. Preferences are complete and transitive. The second version I care about, which is independent of economists, is the idea that people understand their own preferences. And this is a situation in which people can get into trouble. If we understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, even if it's inconsistent with economic theory, we're unlikely to make mistakes. But if there's something within us that doesn't allow us to understand what are the sources of our preferences and our decisions, then we might get into trouble. And I care about that decision as well, that kind of definition, because if I want to get the world into being a better place, we have to understand the places where people don't understand why they behave. I should point out that there's one more version of violations of rationality. For example, generosity. The fact that we give money to other people, the fact that you ask somebody for advice on the street and might give it to you, the fact that people are less selfish than economists believe, this for me is not an issue. Why? Because it's true it violates economic theory, but it's not something that people are wrong about. When you ask people about their generosity, they say, oh yes, I understand this is not part of the rational theory, but I still want to be generous, which is perfectly fine. So the second definition, it's something that people don't understand what is influencing them. And therefore we get into trouble. Okay?
Counter-arguments? Counter-arguments?
Okay, so first you have to understand that this is a conversation that goes on in a continuous time for many years. So you learn something, but
Not enough.
in the sense that you are only being logical, but you don't make much sense. You learned, like an economist, to build an argument, but you also need to make sense. So let me ask you a question, and you just answer with yes or no. Is smoking rational?
No.
Okay, so I think that smoking might be rational. Is overeating rational?
No.
I think that it might be rational. What's the definition of overeating? Suppose I'm enjoying being an obese. Now, I'm not exercising at all. Zero. I'm not rational, right?
You look very good despite it.
He always does it.
Okay.
Yeah, continue with flattering.
Oh, so flattery, by the way, is an interesting example because it turns out
Lying
that
too.
people enjoy compliments. They think the person who's giving them compliment is smarter. They enjoy it even when they know the flattery is insincere.
Like in this. I think on the scoring board it would be now 1-0.
Okay, so let's look at let's think about this as an example. I think this question of hyperbolic discounting or time preferences is really kind of a central issue for thinking about rationality versus irrationality. So just as a raise of hand, how many people here in the last month have eaten more than you wished you would?
Don't answer this question.
No. How many people in the last month have exercised less than you think you should? Okay. How many?
It was the exam period.
I know.
Ah, yeah.
How many people here have ever texted while driving? How many people here have ever had unplanned, unprotected sex? Okay. Now think about those. Those things would fit the rational framework if you thought about them carefully. So if you told me and you said, you know what, I thought about texting and driving. I thought about how much I enjoy living. I thought about how much I don't want to kill other people. I thought about how important this text is, and I weighted the pros and the cons, and I decided this is an important thing to do, and the risk is worth it. If you thought this way, I would say you have made a rational decision. But how many of you have regretted texting and driving? I mean, I'm guessing everybody. Nobody said, you know what, I don't think I text and drive enough. So my...
But it's not important what people say, it's important what they do.
Yeah. So, and here is, by the way, one of the issue of argument. If you believe that what people are doing is inherently rational, you're basically in a cyclable argument in which you cannot escape. There's no way for people to be irrational if you assume that from the beginning everything they do. But in this particular case, I think that you can say to people, what are you planning doing in the future? What do you do at the moment? And what do you think exposed about your decisions? If you say to yourself, I really wish I would not text and drive, and then after the fact you said, I really wish I didn't text and drive, but at the moment you text and drive, this is for me a kind of influence that suggests very strongly that people are not perfectly rational.
Okay. Can I respond?
Go ahead, but just
So,
2 minutes.
2 minutes. So I think that driving is an excellent example because we cannot think about driving as something that is an evolutionary adaptation. We were not designed to move in these boxes in 90 kilometers per hour. However, if I ask you, do you think that when people drive overall, are they rational? Of course they are. We are extremely good in this. Extremely good in this. So, yeah, from time to time we text, from time to time we speak on the cell phone, but just think about the number of accidents and per miles. It's unbelievable. When they invented the car, people didn't even think. They said that there is no point building cars that will drive more than 40 kilometers per hour because people will die. This is not the case. We are very good drivers. There are some maniacs, we know, but overall, we are extremely good in this.
So this is, I think, a case where it's incredible.
Whoa. Oh. Need to ask for permission.
Oh, can I get permission? This, I think, is a case where a simple superficial analysis would tell you that people are basically driving well. But in fact, if you go ahead and you talk to highway engineers know a lot about human irrationality. They think very carefully about the width of the road. They think very carefully about the sides and the thing that does brrr when you go over it. They think very carefully about the angles, and they think carefully about signs. If people were driving rationally, none of those would be needed. In fact, we could have no speed limit. We could allow people to drive while drinking because after all, people would make the right decisions all the time. I think driving is probably the best examples of how incapable people are. Actually, it's not the best example of how incapable we are, but it's the best illustration. Why? Because when people make mistakes in driving, we see the casualties.
You know, this is
I think when people make mistakes in the financial markets, we don't see the casualties to the same degree. But in driving, we see the casualty, and because of that, we create tremendous regulation that would make no sense if people were perfectly rational. And we create tremendous rules, and we also invest a lot in technology for roads. You know that the people who do highway engineering worry about the type of cement or material that they use and the amount of noise that it will create because they know that if the noise level goes down, people drive faster. You have no idea the amount of technology that goes into roads to get people to behave differently because people are incredibly irresponsible whenever you give them too much horsepower.
So I'll respond. I promise you we converge. You know, the kind of argument that you are giving is, you know, the fact that we invented spoons to eat soup and we don't eat it with a knife, it's because people are irrational. They cannot eat spoon with a knife. Of course, if you replace the wheel of the car to something else, will make accidents. No. But the fact about rationality is, given that I'm giving you the best optimal conditions for you to get from point A to point B in your car, will you do it? The answer is yes.
No. No. The right optimal conditions would be a free market. It would not to restrict your driving. Why driving age? Why a license? I mean, you can think, it's not about spoon. It's not about creating a market that allows people to drive as they want. In fact, it's not creating a spoon. It's not creating a technology. It's creating a technology that limits human ability to behave as they want. Now, if you came with an example that says, here is a technology that limits human ability to an incredible degree, like driving, because people are perfectly rational, I think that would be really inconsistent. In fact, roads, we recognize the many, many types of mistakes people do. Look, texting and driving. What do you think happens in the US?
What's the point in texting and driving?
Yeah. What do you think happens in people die, that's the reason. But what do you think happens in the US in states that have legislated that you cannot text and drive? Accident rate goes up. Why? Because instead of texting over the wheel, people text under the wheel, making it much more dangerous. Really, it's an amazing idea that people take this risk to their lives, and to say that this reflects perfect rationality, I think, you know what? I think you're kind of eliminating the value of the concept of rationality if you're willing to include such behaviors in it.
I have an answer.
Okay, we'll keep on going.
But we'll go to the next round, I think.
Yes. Okay, so
I'll get you later.
A scientific theory must be consistent with Popper's falsifiability principle. Now, before you all panic, I'll say it in other words. A theory should be considered scientific if and only if it can be rejected by observation or experiment. Now, what I'm asking you is to present the falsifiability points in your theory. Because if your theory is a scientific theory, so show it in your theory. And explain why you still feel that your theory is valid, even though those points. Dan, go first.
So let me start by pointing to a very kind of sad reality about behavioral economics. And one of the sad realities is that we don't have a unified theory. Right? We have lots and lots of places in which people misbehave or don't behave according to economic theory, and we don't have a unified theory. And one of the questions is, will we ever have a unified theory? And I think the answer is no. If you think about something simple like vision, relatively simple, the human eye has four mechanisms to see. We have a mechanism to see in the middle of our eye, in the periphery, movement, no movement, in the dark, not in the dark, colors, black and white. We have lots of mechanisms just to see. And we don't have one theory for seeing because we have four mechanisms. Now think about the complexity of human behavior and ask whether you think there's going to be one mechanism, one theory that is going to explain all aspects of human behavior. I think it will be a nice idea, but I don't think it would happen. I think we have taken this complex cognitive machinery that we have, and we're adapting it to deal with healthcare, we're adapting it to deal with finance, we're adapting it to deal with driving. And we're not going to get one answer, one theory, one mechanism that drives everything. There's going to be some things that are going to be related, but not a lot. And because of that, I think it will be really hard to disprove behavioral economics in general. At the same time, it's an incredibly empirical study. I think one of the big differences between economists and people who do more psychological research is that we don't commit in the beginning to anything. In fact, if I do an experiment and I start with some assumption and I see that people behave in the same way that economic theory would predict, I'm not unhappy. This is just what the data shows. And if I do an experiment and I see that people don't behave in the way that economic theory predicts, that's fine too. We're just empirical in nature. So every one of our experiments is not about a belief in a theory. There's no religious underlying pinning to the discipline. Instead of religion, it's just a belief in data. And we would take every piece of data in every aspect of behavior and take it as either proving it or disproving, helping us believe and not. One of the concepts I like the most about economics is the notion of updating beliefs. And what's the idea? And the idea is you're supposed to be a good Bayesian updater, and you're supposed to hold some beliefs, and then you're supposed to get some data. And if the data doesn't fit with your belief, you're supposed to update. Now, should you fix your opinion all of a sudden? No. But should you update? Yes. And I would expect that people who've been exposed to data for a long time would at least start updating.
Okay. That's my turn, right? Okay, so I think that there are good news and bad news in what Dan tells us. So if we think about physics, let's take a metaphor from physics. We economists came with a theory of gravity. It's a unified, it's an umbrella theory. It's always wrong. It's only right under ideal conditions in the laboratory. What Dan is doing, Dan is taking plates and going on tall buildings and throwing them. And he thinks, or at least this is the good news, you don't think that you will be able to develop theory from keep throwing tall plates from buildings. You know that there is an error. But yes, I agree. When you go, and if I, of course, I wish I was in physics, because then I wouldn't go into this kind of, I guess, debate between academia and non-academia. But in some sense, I think that what you tell me is that you throw more plates from tall building, and I should update my beliefs in a Bayesian fashion. And yes, I'm updating it in my Bayesian fashion. Very, very little. Okay, so now to the problem. Oh.
Can I just remind you that if you're going to be sneaky and shoot under the belt,
it's 1-1.
Yeah,
let me just tell you that if you're going to do it, I know too many members of your family, and we can talk about rationality.
You see? I think yellow card. I think someone deserves a yellow card. Okay, so now let me tell you. So what? What are you doing?
you got the yellow card.
You cannot talk to the referee. I forgot. Okay, so I think that we have an umbrella theory, but definitely the theory has shortcomings. And every theory has shortcomings when you take it to the data. And the shortcomings of theory is always identification and measurement. Why? Because we have a theory just about a slice of life. And when you observe data in the real world, there are many, many things enter. So you need to be able to identify what you really want. When you throw plates from tall buildings, you want to distinguish gravity from noise. And the other thing is measurement. We want to measure. When you throw a plate, it's speed. But when you talk about human behavior, you need measurement. So now, let me go back a little bit. And as you can see, Dan and I, we behave differently. We choose different things. And without getting into whether what I choose is right or what Dan chooses is right, let's try to understand what are the sources of heterogeneity in what people choose in general. And let me say that there are five sources of heterogeneity. The one of them is preferences. I might have different preferences than Dan. Dan like iMac, he's cool, and I have a ThinkPad. Secondly, we might have the same preferences, but we have different information. For some reason, I think that ThinkPad is more reliable than Mac. The third thing is beliefs, because even if we have the same information, we might form different beliefs. If you ask Dan, what is the probability that an Israeli will get a gold medal in the Olympic Games? We might have exactly the same information, but regarding to this event, we can basically have very different beliefs. And finally, there are constraints. You know, Dan can resist temptation, and I'm a weak person. What can I do? Now, finally, it can be that I'm irrational, I'm a bad decision maker, and Dan is a good decision maker. And all of these 5 factors together, preferences, information, beliefs, constraints, and rationality or quality of decision making, enter into the decisions that we make. So the first thing that I have a problem is to identify the heterogeneity in choices that is coming from each one of these arguments. And I think that a lot of the confusion that Dan has is that he basically thinks that heterogeneity in choices that are coming from information, beliefs, constraints, or many other things are coming from what we call rationality. This is the first thing. The second thing, even if I could identify them, what I need to measure how close people are to be rational. And let me say that we didn't fully solve the identification and the measurement problem, but I'll talk about it later, I hope, in other questions. I think we are making very good progress in the last 50 years.
Counter-argument.
So I think we kind of got you got a little bit off the question. Is the theory falsifiable? I think what Shachar gave is a fantastic demonstration of why it's so difficult to falsify economic theories. Because if you believe that people are doing something rational, and that's your starting point, then the question is, why is it rational? And if you can't fit it with the rational, you say, oh, so maybe I have not identified something correctly, or I still need to work more on my measurement tool. It's really quite amazing the extent of exercises rational economists would go to take a really kind of trivial piece of evidence, like, you know, people texting and driving, and start to explain in all kinds of ways why this is actually perfectly rational. And I think this is basically about the difficulty that economists have about just admitting that something is outside of the system. By the way, I think economists need a little bit more humility. I mean, again, it would have been really nice to say we have a theory that explains some of human behavior. It's very different. I gave a talk to some economists, and, you know, like always, I was attacking in a slightly unfriendly way, and somebody attacked me back, and he said, I think it was Sergio Hart, he attacked me back, and he said, we all know that the fully rational theory is not correct. We all know it. Everybody who has a PhD in economics knows that it says as-if theory. It's close, it explains some of it. We just use it as a convenient tool, but we don't really believe in it very strongly. But then Akerlof, not a very good economist, came up and said, and opened the question and said, look, it's true that everybody in this room probably knows that economic theory is not perfectly correct, but what are we selling people? Let's be truthful about what theory are we selling people. What are we selling students in Introduction to Economics 101? What are we selling when we advise governments? And I think there's a duality in economics in which everybody who studies a lot in economics, almost everybody knows it's an approximation as if theory that explains some of human behavior. But the theory that economists have sold, and so successfully, is a very different theory than what the experts really believe in, and that's one of the problems. And the simple theory is unfalsifiable.
You have a counter-argument, or you finished with your first one?
No, of course. So, okay, so...
Where do you start?
Yes, that's exactly the problem. I'll start by asking you a question. You know, so this is the first, I think, time in human history that poor people are fat, meaning poor people have more weight than richer people. So are poor people stupid?
You mean more stupid than other people, or just in general?
You answer it in the way that you want.
So the evidence is that poor people are not different in terms of their cognitive skills. They're very different in terms of their constraints, and because of that, the decisions that they make are very different.
Excellent. So,
but the constraints are largely cognitive constraint and not financial constraint.
okay. So I have. So you are talking, I think, exactly about the identification problem. There is also a view that poor people are fat, not because some people would say it's constraints. It can be financial constraints, that bad food is cheap. But it might also be preferences. You are rich, I'm poor, and if I don't get ice cream at the end of the day, I just can't get by. It might be information. It's not that I'm stupid, but I'm working so hard, I cannot read the labels. I just don't know that this food is bad for me. Or, you are rich because you have high education, you learn statistics, and you can actually do the updating, what it will do to you. But in no way, it means that I'm irrational.
So
now,
you're confusing necessary, you're confusing, is it necessary that you're irrational, or is it possible that you're irrational? I agree with you. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily irrational, but let's think of the data. Let's think about what the data is about the poor.
Let's continue. I think we agree. That's perfectly fine.
What is the data about the poor? The data about the poor...
Dan, 1 minute, okay?
1 minute. I'm timing myself. The data about the poor has a lot to do with what's called depletion. Depletion is the notion that as we think and exercise to a higher degree, we fail to temptation to a higher degree. You go and you see a cookie and you're tempted and you overcome it, you get a little weaker. You go and you see something else tempting, you get a little weaker. Poor people have to think consistently about their financial constraints. Their cognitive capacity to resist temptation diminishes, and because of that, they succumb to more temptation. So they have different constraints? Absolutely. Do they have physical constraints, financial constraints? Absolutely, but it's also cognitive constraint, which is not a part of the rational theory. In the rational theory, there's no cognitive constraint. There's no, for example, getting tired from making decisions.
Okay, so let's do like this, okay?
This is my turn now to begin.
Let's do like this. We have 2 more questions. You each one give an answer and then the counter argument. Each one of you, if he wants to give another counter argument, he have only 1 to give, okay? Not in every question, 1 for the next 2 questions, because it goes to infinity.
Can't you see we are enjoying ourselves?
I know you're enjoying.
You are destroying our utility. Say something here.
Do we have to abide by these rules?
Absolutely not.
It's not my professor.
Follow any rules?
Shachar forgot he's not my professor anymore.
Okay.
Okay, so 3rd question. One of the largest criticisms of academy is that theory is nice on paper, however, it does not stand the test of reality. So the question is, how does your theory match reality? What criteria validates your response?
Okay, so first I want to still comment on what you said, on what you said earlier. So first, there are 3 types of theory. There is a normative theory. A normative theory is how people ought to choose. Don't murder, don't cheat on your wife, etc., etc. These are normative statements, right? This is how we ought to choose. There are descriptive theories, and they are how people actually choose. This is what you are asking me now, how descriptive my theory is. And there are also prescriptive theories. They basically give a practical aid to choice, a prescription how to choose. And I actually agree with you that many economists, some of them are quite important economists, oversold or basically emphasized many economic models as descriptive models or even prescriptive models where they are actually normative models. So there is no doubt, I think, that when we face uncertainty, we should do Bayesian updating. Maybe we even want to do Bayesian updating, but we cannot do it. So I would think about exponential discounting, expected utility, as the right normative theory. Both expected utility and exponential discounting and many other things. Also, John Rawls, the theory of justice. It's a normative theory. It's not even a prescriptive theory. It doesn't tell you how to be moral. It just tells you this is what is moral to do. Now, to this respect, I agree, and I want to say, maybe I'm going to make many people angry here, that, you know, one advantage, I can say many, of economics over the other social sciences is that we are not only the most precise social science, but we are also a social science that I think combine normative theory, descriptive theory, and prescriptive theory, and the way that I see psychology, maybe I'm wrong, this is a descriptive theory, or no theory at all, you are saying. It's a descriptive field. So this is the first thing. Now, you know, Milton Friedman and other economists said, many people said it in economics, a theory doesn't have to be precise, it doesn't have to be correct descriptively in order to be useful. Many times I prefer to be strong and wrong. It's more progress to science than being iffy. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, sometimes I don't know at all. And sometimes I'm just having fun. Now, finally, to your question, I think that we are very close to being descriptive. I don't want to explain you how, but if you ask me how rational the Dutch are, so I will tell you, in a measure from 0 to 1, where 1 is perfectly rational, the Dutch are 0.88. And the difference, the 12% difference, is the money that they leave on the table because of irrationality. So first I solve you the identification problem, I solve you the measurement problem because I gave you a well-defined concept, and I'm telling you how much money it is, and it's also very well correlated with, you know, other things that psychologists are happy. That's it. That was a climax. You have to.
It was, I felt it. So first of all, I think that Shachar basically gave up the debate because Shachar said that economic theory is a normative theory, not necessarily a descriptive theory, right? So if you say how much does it match reality, matching reality is about being descriptive. So I think I want another point for this. Actually, he should get a minus point because he just gave up this point.
The point is for the zings.
I see. So it's true that economic theory is not a descriptive theory, it's a normative theory. The problem is that, again, economists sell it as if it's a descriptive theory and as if it's a prescriptive theory, right? And those are problems. Now imagine you had a theory, imagine you had an engineering theory that was 28% correct and you went and built a bridge based on that. Do you really want that? Now, social sciences outside of economics are exactly about reality. The rest of social science, unlike economic, has no starting point in any particular beliefs. It's only about data. So if you start about just believing with data, the best fit you could get is what the data tells you. Now, we don't always have perfect experiments, we don't always have perfect measurement, but we're basically trying to get our theory to match data to the highest degree as possible. Now, in our effort to get our theory to match data in the higher degree possible, we don't always get very parsimonious theories. But whatever we get is the highest possible fit with existing data. So I think on this criteria, there's no competition between
first,
the two.
I'll use my counter-argument to re-explain then what I said.
Okay.
So first, I said that theories in economics there are normative theories in economics, there are descriptive theories in economics, and there are prescriptive theories in economics. I didn't say that it's all normative. What I said, that people that are selling economics only as a descriptive field are wrong. This is the first thing. The second thing that I think is important here, I'm giving you a theory which I will agree that it's normative. You need to be an expected utility maximizer. Now, I can also tell you, because I'm doing things mathematically, I can always also tell you how close people are in some mathematical metric to maximize expected utility. Now, when you are saying we don't care about parsimonious models, we'll just add more and more parameters into the dish and eventually we'll explain everything. Yeah, this is correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Good luck.
So you gave up the second one as well, great. So let me emphasize the 2 points. When you take economists and you let them play behavioral game with other economists, they all agree about how to behave. For example, let's say you do the trust game. You give one person $100 and you say, look, you're player A, you can either take the $100 and go home, or you can pass the $100 to player 2. If you pass the $100 to player 2 will get $400. The money will quadruple. And then player 2 could decide to do one of two things. They could either go home with all the money, $400, or they could send back $200 to player A. Now, if you are player A, what you predict player B would do? If you think everybody is perfectly rational, you say, player B doesn't know me, I can't find them. They will take the money and go home. And therefore, I will not send them the money. If you're an economist, that's what you believe that other people would do, and therefore you behave this way. If you're not an economist, and you haven't taken a class in economics, you say, I have encountered before people who've been quite generous.
Some people that took classes in economics still don't understand this point.
Yeah, that's right. And then, by the way, when do you think people are least generous to charities? When they leave classes in economics. Because after you finish teaching them that being selfish is the best thing possible to maximize social utility, they're a bit more selfish. So anyway, so if you get economists to behave, economists behave as economic theory would tell them to do. Nobody sends them money, nobody sends them back. When you get normal people who haven't been overtrained and brainwashed by economics, they're actually much more generous and much more reciprocating. So when you ask about what's a normative theory, you also have to ask, what is the person that you're playing? And the answer of a normative theory when you're playing against a rational actor is a very different answer from a normative theory when you're playing with a non-rational actor. And the normative theory in economics is a theory where everybody is perfectly rational.
What can I say? He's confused. It's a problem. Can I unconfuse him a little bit?
Yeah, you have.
Okay, so, look, in economics, we distinguish what we call decision theory from game theory. When I talked about rationality in economics, I talked about decision theory. This is me making a decision vis-a-vis the market. It has no effect on other people, and whatever people will do will have no effect on me. If you want to go into game theory, then we'll need to start talking about equilibrium. And, the fact that, game theory, I think it's a perfect example. It is true. This requires a completely new level of rationality than the rationality that we talked earlier, because this requires infinite levels of rationality. I need to assume that you need to assume that I need that you are rational. However, although the theory is quite complicated, I would say that the theory predicts well, and in the sense that it not predicts perfectly, but you have a metric how far the theory is by, for example, things that you know, like quantum response equilibrium. We talked about it in Princeton, remember? So I have a metric, and it's true. Nash equilibrium is not 100% right, but it's also not 100% wrong, and I think it's an important tool to understand human behavior.
I'm going to keep my 1 minute for the next period because I have a better time horizon.
Okay. So we're going to skip the fourth question because of the time.
No, you can't. What do you mean?
The fourth question?
What's right? The fourth question is important.
Dan, you're okay with this?
I'm flexible.
There are rules to the game. You cannot make the playoff series instead of 7 games, 6 games all of the sudden.
You didn't get the
referee, are you?
I guess you didn't get my email. Okay.
You don't have question 4? You have question 4.
Of course I have question 4.
Let's go for it.
Okay. So the first question is as follows. It's a bit more juicy. Explain the problems with the research methods and the conclusions of your opponent's approach. Then explain why the approach that you support is more precise and predicts reality better. Finally, what can we take away from a theory and apply in real life? Meaning, what can we apply from this, not if it predicts better.
The floor is yours.
Okay. So I think we've talked about these problems, right? If you start by postulating the conclusion, how valuable is your research method? If you think that the situation that you see is necessarily rational, what can you say about the state of the world? In fact, the only thing you can say is, why is this state of the world rational? But finding out where could we do better is outside of the the constraint. I think what is really interesting about social sciences is that we don't think about the world as being perfectly rational. If you look at individuals, it's kind of sad to assume that people are not perfectly rational. It's kind of sad to wake up next to your partner in the morning and say, this is not a perfectly rational person, I make mistakes and so on. On the other hand, I think it's kind of optimistic about human nature. If you look at the state of the country, you look at the state of the world, you ask yourself, is this the consequence of 6 million rational people in this country, or is this the consequence of 7 billion rational people worldwide? Is this the best we can get? I think what we're saying is that no, this is far away from what the best we could get, and in fact, if we only understood where people go wrong, we could do things well. So let me give you 2 simple versions for application. There's a question of, a very simple question with memory. There's a very nice piece of research about eyewitness testimony. And they showed people, 12 people, and they said this was identification in police lineup. They give them 12 people and say, do you recognize the person that stole or robbed or something else? Versus, they show them one person at a time. And they say, for each person, tell us which was this person or not. Turns out that the percentage of false identification changes dramatically. Why? Because when people see 12 people, all of a sudden, they basically assume one of them is going to be the person. Let me just find out the one that is most similar. When you show them one by one and they don't know where is going to be the end, people don't have this assumption that somebody is going to be in the system. And this has been implemented in quite a lot of police stations. Things are turning out much better. The second incredibly simple example I'll give you is that there's a petrified forest in Arizona. And one of my friends, Noah, told me that another one of our friends was driving through this petrified forest with his fiancée. And his fiancée is a really sweet woman who would never take a thumbtack from the office without permission. And they're driving through this petrified forest and they see this sign that says, every year, 14,000 pounds of petrified forest people take home. Don't take anything. And as they were driving, his fiancée is elbowing him and saying, let's stop and take ours. Where's our petrified thing? And the thing is, they've done research on this sign. Turns out it's the worst possible sign in the world. Why? Because what does it tell you? Tell you everybody is taking it. This, it turns out to be a very, very strong signal for people's behavior. You change the sign, people take less petrified forest. The British government recently did a study in which they mailed people a letter telling them that 9 people out of 10 in their neighborhood have paid their taxes. It increased percentage of tax payment by 15%. Turns out there's lots of things that are incredibly applicable. And if you only understood the nuances of human behavior, not only is your model going to be better, your prediction ability is going to be better. You can get people to behave very differently.
Okay, so, I think Dan gave, with the fiancé, a perfect example. It is true that quite easily we can change, by changing information, we can change people's beliefs. For example, many of us look at what is called the status quo. If the status quo when you renew your driving license is that you will donate your body or any parts of it in case of an accident, if the box is checked yes, then people leave it at yes, and if the box checked no, then people leave it at no, and there are very big differences. Now the question, is this a sign of irrationality? I actually think that this is a sign of rationality. Is it irrational to do what everybody else does because we think that this is the norm? It's perfectly rational. Now, I agree. The fact that we can manipulate what people think by slightly manipulating information, we manipulate their beliefs by a lot, is troubling. Why? Because some people can use it exactly to the wrong way, and who knows what's the right way or the wrong way. So this is my first point. These stories are very interesting. I think I heard them before. But I think that they are just making my point stronger. You have a misidentification problem. You cannot identify what is irrational from what is wrong belief updating, which I would not call irrational, or differences in preferences, or many, many other things. Now, look, I agree. I think that, maybe the catastrophe of economics is that some things that we are doing on our drawing board, policymakers are making policy, and maybe some economists actually convince them to do so. But do you want the economists to step down and the behavioral economists to take their place?
Yes.
Okay, so, we are very good friends. We are very good friends, but sometimes I don't think that we are from different areas. I think that we are from different planets. It's exactly like, many times Dan reminds me of somebody that attacks modern medicine and says, people die, modern medicine is bad, let's go back to ancient medicine. Many times we use expected utility, not because it's right, because it's approximately right, and we don't have a good alternative for it. Now, if you ask me why Google is making more money than Yahoo, I wouldn't say that this is because they have better computer scientists. I would say that it's because they have a better economist who designed the online auctions much better. So I still think that in terms of auctions and mechanism design, if you think about it, come to me.
So I think the...
I asked them to do so.
Oh, that's very nice. Yeah, go, do it
Don't
again.
worry, they like you then.
Do it again.
They like you.
It's so nice to hear like one person clapping. Go for it. I think the example of modern medicine is actually fantastic in this regard. The theory of biology in terms of medicine have brought very little advance to medicine. What has brought fantastic advance is empirical investigation. Now you could say, let's wait with medicine until we have a perfect theory. Imagine what would happen if we take a group of theoretical biologists, and these theoretical biologists would design medicine. No FDA, no empirical testing. We'll have a theory of biology, we'll create drugs based on that, and implement them worldwide. That's basically what theoretical economics is all about. We know the answer, and by the way, a model of biology is much simpler than a model of human behavior, right? Now, I think this is exactly where none of us would even imagine that we could have a state of medicine in that way. Instead, what do we do in medicine? We try lots of different things. There's not a single theory, there's lots of different things. Lots of things are discovered by accident, and not only that, things that have incredibly strong theories for us to believe that they're going to work, turns out not to work well. Okay. For example, cough medicine. For many years we thought that cough medicine was fantastic. People gave it to their kids. Turns out to be counterproductive. Heart stents, fantastic theory, has a beautiful story. Turns out after many years of putting lots of stents in people, have no... Oh, I mean, we're out of time.
Yeah.
Oh.
You have 2 PhDs, and now you also have an MD, I see. You give us such a good explanation.
Some of us read outside of our immediate field.
Really? It means you have a lot of time on your hand. Don't pass. Okay, so
I had the extra answer at the end. He took it earlier.
We are not at the end. This is not the end.
Wasn't there another?
It's only the beginning.
Oh, okay.
But you want to finish your arguments in 5 minutes?
I think I won by so much, there's no reason to continue.
With this, I agree. Just one point. To think about medical experiments as experimenting in a theory-free environment, this is absolutely wrong.
We are not theory-free. We are not theory-free.
This is absolutely wrong. Going into and making a medical trial without having any theory at all, you'll be the first one to volunteer, I'm sure.
By the way, we don't have no theory at all. There's lots of theories. I mean, I think biology...
There are lots of theories. There are too many.
I think medicine is much more similar to the rest of social science than to economics. Would you agree with that?
I can't agree with you on anything, so I won't do this as well. I have to...
So we'll proceed for the last question. Okay, so to conclude the evening, before your questions, some point to think about. An economist will argue, and Shachar argued many times, that he is not interested in what's going through our mind. He's only interested to see what we're actually doing. Our actions is what matter. On the other end, psychologists will argue that it does matter what goes through our mind. It does matter because we can know how to shape our behavior by that and so on. And you can see extreme examples of, I saw on the TV, people that prefer having an iPhone or driving a Mercedes in order to have better food for their kids. So my question is, and it's actually something to do with what they just said. Are we actually arguing about the same thing?
We're just enjoying ourselves, I think, no? So I'll tell you. So, you know, I think that there is one point that I think make this, I think that this differences in opinions are important in many ways, but I just want to highlight one thing, because it's not that we are saying the same, basically. You know, behavioral economists today start to think about the economist as a therapist in basically defining, developing what they call light paternalistic policies. You are irrational. You don't know what to do. Let me help you. And I think that this is a very dangerous slope, just because of the identification problem. So, for example, there is the famous example about rearranging the food in a cafeteria, such that the healthy food comes before the non-healthy food, and it does have an effect. People eat more healthy food. However, this means that we think that this is better to their well-being. Now, it is true, sometimes we require people to put a seatbelt, right? So this is not soft paternalism, this is law, this is hard paternalism. But I think that when we are moving towards soft paternalism and saying, you are not a good decision maker, I will make the decision for you, even in things that, for example, this is life-threatening and not wearing seatbelt, and it's also costly for society. But I think that basically saying here, I think that you are irrational, and I will start now cheating you, manipulating your beliefs in order for you to do what I think is right, this is something that I personally, I'm not willing to accept.
Okay, so maybe 2 points. So I think the big difference is, are we going to have good data that is going to drive our policies, or are we going to have it driven based on theory? And I'll give you one example where I think this clashes. I'm doing lots of research now on dishonesty. I tempt people to steal money from me. I've talked to all kinds of criminals. I talk to lawyers and judges. The economic theory basically said that people think about the consequences of their actions. So people think about, what's the probability of being caught? How much time will I get in prison? Is this particular crime worth it or not? The National Academy of Sciences just finished a study to look at whether states that have the death penalty have a lower crime rate. Now, death penalty, you have to agree, it's kind of a high punishment. You can't go worse than that. What do you think is the evidence? No evidence for influence on crime rate. In fact, in all of our experiments, we don't see that people think about the long-term consequences in the same way that all of you said you text and drive and so on. Now, if we have a theory that people think about those things and we try to deter crime, what would we do? We could create systems like banking with tremendous conflicts of interest inside and think to ourselves that as long as we have big punishment at the end, people would behave well. Turns out that's not the case. So if we take economic theory too seriously, we can really create very, very bad systems. Systems that don't fit human nature and actually create devastating effects. And now, the second point is about light paternalism. I actually think that there are cases we need heavy paternalism. The reality is that we are inventing lots of things in life that are not suitable with our decision-making mechanism. We have evolved over a long time to deal with all kinds of problems. The problems that the modern world is causing us to face are not necessarily one that we were designed well to deal with. Think about global warming as an example. Can you think about people dealing well with the issues of global warming? Really hard to imagine, right? In fact, if you went about it the other way and you said, let's create a problem that would maximize human apathy, you would come up with global warming. Long in the future, would happen to other people first, we don't see it progressing, we don't see anybody suffering, anything we would do is a drop in the bucket. Each of those separately contributes to human apathy. Can we think that people could start caring? I don't know what your opinions are about global warming, let's just assume it's correct. If it's correct, we are going into a devastation of our planet. Can you think under any constraint that people would all of a sudden realize that and start behaving well? I think it's incredibly hard to imagine that. And therefore, I think in some cases, and we need to be empirical about it, Shachar wants to have freedom, and I think freedom is a really nice value. And every time that human behavior is not causing devastating effects, we should not be paternalistic. But every time we have a chance to kill ourselves, to kill other people, to destroy the planet and so on, I think we need to be paternalistic. How paternalistic? The bigger the damage we're likely to cause ourselves, the more paternalistic we would be. And it's not the behavioral economist who's the paternalist. It's all about data.
Okay, so I'll say a few things very quickly. So first, Dan makes it looks like economics is a data-free field. But there is a lot of data in economics. Actually, most of empirical economics is done with data from the real world. Experiments are a small slice, as they should be in economics, because unlike psychology, we have enormous amounts of data. And if you compare econometrics to psychometrics, it's like rocket science relative to not rocket science. So first, we know we have data. It's not experimental data, so we don't have to care about external validity. All the nice stories that you tell us here are really thought-provoking, but what is their external validity to other situations? And I just want to comment on one of them, which is the global warming. Global warming is a simple coordination problem, because if the Chinese care about the environment, the Americans have all incentives not to do this. This is exactly the point. It's simple coordination problem. Now, I think you get the message. I think that I basically, or it's not I, it's economists. We have a very powerful tool. And I agree with you, we sometimes overused it, and it caused problems. But, it is an umbrella in unified theory. It is supported with data. I believe that you don't go out to the world and you collect data without theory. It's like, in mathematics, there is a difference between a proof and a counterexample. In empirical research, it's hard to give a proof. There is no proof. But going and collecting counterexamples will not get you there. Now, I just want to end, and then I think there are questions, by emphasizing to you how different we are when we think about the world. So when we were in Princeton, Dan presented a paper about cheating on your tax returns.
Not on mine. Other people.
Of course. Of course. No one from the IRS is here, don't worry. It will just be on YouTube. And he came with a number that I don't remember, and we talked just on our way to your talk, and you told me about, how much people are basically cheating on their taxes in the US. And his view was, so we didn't argue about the number, but his view is, people are cheating so much. And I said to myself, people are cheating so little. So I think that even if we have data that we are not, that we don't argue, we have very different views about how to interpret it.
Do I have the 1 minute?
Yeah, counter.
So I think this is exactly the problem. So I'm not saying that economics is not data-driven, but it's driven for data in support of a theory. Imagine that you have a theory that explains 10% of human behavior. And imagine that all you did in life was to look for data that supports it. And you did lots of things and used very fancy econometric, and in every paper you published, you had an R square of 10, 1.0. 0.1. And you said, look at this, I have an R square of 0.1, it's supporting my theory. I'm not saying economic theory is 100% wrong. Sure, it explains some of human behavior. But there's a huge difference between looking at evidence that supports your initial belief versus being theory-free and looking at what, by the way, not theory-free completely, but there's a different way about being open to the data to violate your theory. And now think about it. What happens if you have a theory that has an R square of 0.1 that supports your theory? Is this good or bad? Right? Most economists would say, I've won. Let me publish this in econometric. I can show that I can explain a little bit of the variance of the world with this theory. But do we really want to take it seriously beyond academic? And do we want to start building the world according to the theory, assuming that it's 100% correct? I have lots of respect for economics. I think it's a beautiful theory, like many other theories. But when we come to the world, I think we should look at psychology, sociology, anthropology, economics too. But we shouldn't be as arrogant to say there's one theory explains fully human behavior, and let's use that theory to, for example, decide about how to punish people for bad behavior because that would deter crime, or how to use that to create human coordination or any other problem.
And thank you everyone for coming.